In the hushed light of a modern courtroom, anticipation mingled with the weight of history. Snoop Dogg, legendary rapper and icon, strode in with his unmistakable cool, his presence commanding respect even before a single word was uttered. By his side trotted Dogg, his faithful German shepherd, whose long, jagged scar, a souvenir from battles past, spoke silently of hardship and resilience. Every eye in the chamber, from seasoned jurists to fervent onlookers, was fixed on this unexpected hero as he took the stand in a case that promised to redefine the boundaries of justice in the music industry. Snoop's role was not that of a defendant, but as a pivotal witness in a sprawling corruption trial. The case revolved around allegations of systemic exploitation, coercion, and abuse of power within the very industry that had once nurtured his dreams. The accused, Vinnie Vinyl, a former record executive with an impeccable public image, was now facing charges that exposed his involvement in a network of fraudulent contracts, intimidation tactics, and even violent acts designed to silence young talent. For years, Snoop Dogg had carried the burden of his early experiences, times when he was forced, under duress, to sign deals that strangled his creative spirit. The painful memories had rendered him silent for too long, and he bore the scars of an industry that exploited those who dared to dream. Today, however, he was determined to break that silence, using his testimony to shine a light on the dark underbelly of a system that had once tried to crush him. And at his side, Dogg, the ever-observant canine, was ready to add a layer of truth that words alone could not convey. As the trial commenced, the courtroom atmosphere became electric. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of exploitation and corruption, while the defense clung desperately to their carefully constructed narrative of innocence. Snoop Dogg sat quietly, his eyes reflective as he recalled a past marred by betrayal and coercion. Each time he shifted in his seat, Dogg's ears pricked up in attention, and his gaze would fix sharply on Vinnie Vinyl, a man whose confident demeanor belied a history of unspeakable acts. The tension in the room grew palpable when Dogg suddenly reacted. His body stiffened, his eyes locked onto Vinnie with an intensity that transcended the ordinary. The reaction was not random, it was as if Dogg could sense an unspoken truth, a deep-seated wrong that resonated with every fiber of his being. Judge Rhythm, a seasoned jurist known for his unwavering integrity, noted the disturbance and called for a brief recess to allow the court to absorb this unexpected turn. During the pause, the murmur of hushed conversations filled the corridors. In a quiet room away from prying eyes, Snoop Dogg met with his attorney, MC Justice, whose calm assurance belied the storm of emotions swirling around them. "You know," Snoop began softly, "I've seen darkness in this industry enough to make a man lose his voice. But sometimes, the truth finds a way to speak, even when we cannot." His words, laden with personal history and raw emotion, resonated with everyone present. It was a promise that no injustice would go unchallenged, no matter how deeply it was buried beneath layers of deceit. Back in the courtroom, the proceedings resumed with a renewed sense of purpose. Snoop Dogg was called to the stand, and as he rose, every eye in the gallery fell upon him. His testimony was not merely a recounting of events, it was a powerful narrative of survival, struggle, and the unyielding quest for justice. He began by detailing his early years in the music scene, painting a picture of a young artist filled with ambition and hope. Yet, beneath the glittering surface lay a harsh reality: exploitative executives, corrupt deals, and a system designed to profit off the dreams of the vulnerable. Snoop's voice, measured yet resonant, carried the weight of those painful memories. He recounted nights spent under the oppressive glare of studio lights, forced to sign contracts that stripped him of his artistic freedom. He spoke of clandestine meetings in smoky backrooms, where promises of stardom were traded for signatures on paper that would later haunt him. The courtroom was spellbound as he described the relentless pressure to conform to a system that valued profit over passion. Throughout his testimony, Dogg, ever the vigilant companion, remained by his side. Every time Snoop mentioned a name or recounted an encounter with Vinnie Vinyl, Dogg's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The loyal German shepherd's body would tense, his eyes would narrow, and his posture would shift as though preparing to alert his master to an unseen danger. These moments were brief, yet they spoke volumes. They were a silent testament to the depth of the bond between man and animal, a bond that transcended language and conveyed truths too profound for words alone. In one particularly harrowing segment of his testimony, Snoop recalled an evening when, as a young artist, he was cornered by men working on behalf of Vinnie Vinyl. Under the dim glow of streetlights, threats were made, and promises of retribution loomed large. It was that night, he said, when the pulsating bass of his future music was born, a bass that would come to symbolize his refusal to be silenced. The imagery of that night, the mixture of fear and defiance, resonated deeply with the audience. Even as Snoop's voice trembled with the memory, his eyes burned with an unyielding resolve. As the narrative unfolded, the defense tried desperately to undermine Snoop's credibility. MC Slick, Vinnie Vinyl's slick attorney, argued that the emotional outbursts from Dogg were nothing more than reflexive behavior, unscientific and irrelevant in a court of law. An animal cannot be held to the same standard as a human witness, he argued, attempting to discredit both the testimony and the loyal companion's reactions. But the courtroom was not swayed. The prosecution, bolstered by expert testimonies and corroborative evidence, countered that Dogg's reactions were not random. They were a manifestation of an intrinsic connection to the truth, a connection that had been forged over years of shared experience and hardship. Detective Beat, the lead investigator on the case, took the stand next. With a voice as steady as the beat of a metronome, he outlined the painstaking investigation that had uncovered a trail of corrupt practices leading back to Vinnie Vinyl. Detective Beat presented documents detailing forged contracts, recordings of clandestine meetings, and confidential testimonies from other artists who had suffered under Vinnie's ruthless tactics. One document, in particular a signed paper found amidst a pile of altered records, had been the turning point in the investigation. Its authenticity, confirmed by forensic experts, directly implicated Vinnie in a network of exploitation that spanned several years. Meanwhile, as the evidence mounted, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from one of cautious curiosity to outright conviction. Snoop Dogg's testimony, combined with Dogg's nearly inexplicable reactions, began to paint a portrait of a man whose public persona was a mask hiding a lifetime of moral bankruptcy. The narrative was no longer about isolated incidents, it was about a systematic abuse of power that had ruined lives and stifled creativity. The courtroom, filled with journalists, industry insiders, and ordinary citizens, felt as if it were witnessing the unmasking of an era defined by corruption. In a particularly dramatic moment, as Snoop detailed yet another instance of coercion, Dogg suddenly moved. The German shepherd advanced slowly toward the witness table, his eyes never leaving Vinnie Vinyl. The movement was deliberate, filled with an urgency that sent a ripple of shock through everyone present. Judge Rhythm, noticing the charged intensity in the room, paused the proceedings once more to allow the moment to settle. This was not a simple animal reaction, it was as if Dogg was summoning the courage of every victim who had ever been exploited by a predatory system. During the recess, a flurry of activity ensued behind the scenes. Forensic analysts re-examined evidence, and legal teams hurried to consolidate their arguments. Snoop Dogg, sitting in a quiet corner with MC Justice, reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. "I've been through storms that would break lesser men," he murmured, his eyes distant yet determined. "But every storm ends, and today, we're here to bring in the dawn." His words resonated with the promise of change, a promise not just for him, but for every artist who had been silenced by injustice. As the trial resumed, expert witnesses from the fields of music production and psychology were called to the stand. One psychologist, specializing in trauma recovery, explained how the relentless pressure and exploitation in the music industry could leave lasting scars on a young mind. The testimony was poignant, filled with clinical insights that underscored the real human cost of Vinnie Vinyl's actions. Another expert, a veteran music producer, spoke of the lost voices of countless artists whose potential had been smothered by deals that stripped away their individuality. Together, their testimonies reinforced Snoop Dogg's narrative, painting a picture of an industry that had long prioritized profit over passion and human dignity. Throughout this segment of the trial, Dogg's presence remained a constant, almost symbolic reminder of the loyalty and trust that had carried Snoop through his darkest moments. Each time Vinnie Vinyl shifted in his seat, Dogg's reaction grew more pronounced, a subtle warning that the truth could not be hidden forever. It was during one of these exchanges that a murmur began to ripple through the courtroom. Some observers speculated that Dogg's reaction was more than instinct. It might be a conditioned response, a long-forgotten memory of past encounters with the man now on trial. As the day wore on, tensions escalated further. The defense's attempts to discredit Snoop Dogg's account began to unravel in the face of incontrovertible evidence. Documents recovered from a storage facility linked Vinnie Vinyl not only to exploitative contracts, but also to a series of clandestine meetings where underhanded deals were struck. Among the evidence was an audio recording of a heated conversation, where Vinnie was heard making veiled threats against a young artist who dared to question his methods. The recording sent shockwaves through the courtroom, leaving even the most skeptical jurors in stunned silence. In one dramatic turn, Detective Beat presented a breakthrough. Forensic experts had discovered traces of a unique scent on a document that matched samples taken from Dogg's fur, a scent that had also been detected at several crime scenes associated with Vinnie Vinyl's operations. The revelation was subtle yet explosive, hinting at a connection that no one had anticipated. Even the defense was forced to acknowledge that this was no coincidence, but rather a convergence of clues that pointed directly at the corrupt executive. Snoop Dogg, now visibly moved by the sheer weight of the evidence and the unwavering support of his loyal companion, addressed the court once again. "I'm not here just to tell my story," he said, his voice resonant with authority and raw emotion. "I'm here for every artist, every dreamer who was forced into silence. I'm here to say that our voices matter, and today, they will not be ignored." His words, delivered with the cadence of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting his craft, echoed off the walls of the courtroom like a rallying cry. Judge Rhythm, who had listened intently to every testimony, finally prepared to deliver his verdict. But before the final pronouncement, he allowed both sides a last opportunity to present closing arguments. The defense, through MC Slick, argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Snoop Dogg's emotional testimony could not be taken as concrete proof of any wrongdoing. They insisted that the outbursts of Dogg were nothing more than reflexes, not reliable indicators of guilt. Their words, however, were met with a counterweight of undeniable proof presented by the prosecution. The prosecution's final argument was a tapestry of heartfelt testimonies, forensic analyses, and documentary evidence that linked Vinnie Vinyl to a legacy of exploitation and coercion. Expert after expert recounted the systematic nature of the abuses, how a network of corrupted power had preyed upon vulnerable talents, and how the industry had turned a blind eye to the suffering inflicted upon them. In a moment of clarity, one of the prosecution's star witnesses, a once-up-and-coming artist whose career had been decimated by Vinnie's machinations, stood to testify. With tears glistening in their eyes, they recounted in painstaking detail the exploitation and manipulation they had endured, providing the human face to a story that had been told in numbers and contracts. As the courtroom braced for the final decision, Dogg remained at Snoop's side, a silent guardian whose eyes communicated more than any spoken word could. The atmosphere was thick with expectation, every breath held in collective anticipation of justice long denied. When Judge Rhythm finally spoke, his voice was measured and deliberate. "Based on the overwhelming evidence and the consistent, heartfelt testimony provided today, I find Vinnie Vinyl guilty of corruption, exploitation, and coercion. This court hereby sentences you to a lifetime of accountability and restitution, so that no other artist may ever endure the suffering you have inflicted." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom as Vinnie Vinyl's confident facade crumbled. The defense's murmurs subsided, replaced by a palpable sense of vindication. Snoop Dogg's eyes met those of his loyal companion, and in that silent exchange, there was an unspoken promise that the voice of truth, no matter how long it had been suppressed, would now echo powerfully through the corridors of power. In the days that followed, The verdict became the subject of relentless media coverage. Headlines across the nation celebrated the triumph of truth over tyranny, and Snoop Dogg's courageous stand became an inspirational beacon for artists and activists alike. On social media, clips of Dogg's testimony and Dogg's poignant reactions went viral, sparking conversations about the need for reform within the music industry and the importance of safeguarding creative freedom. Fans, industry veterans, and everyday citizens found themselves united by a newfound determination to challenge exploitation and to honor the voices that had been silenced for far too long. Snoop Dogg, ever the advocate for change, soon addressed the nation in a televised interview. "I spent years in the shadows, forced to keep quiet about the injustices that scarred me and so many others," he declared. "But today, we've shown that even the smallest voice and even a silent, loyal friend can speak volumes when the truth is on the line. This isn't just about me, it's about every artist who's ever been used and every dream that's been crushed. We are reclaiming our power, and we're never going to let them take it away again." His words, imbued with the raw energy of lived experience, resonated with millions and reinvigorated a movement that had been simmering beneath the surface for too long. In the aftermath of the trial, a series of documentaries and in-depth news reports chronicled the journey from exploitation to redemption. Interviews with fellow artists, industry insiders, and even former associates of Vinnie Vinyl painted a picture of an industry desperately in need of reform. A coalition of musicians, producers, and activists came together to launch the Voice of Truth initiative, a fund dedicated to supporting emerging talent and ensuring that no artist would ever be exploited in the same manner again. The initiative was a direct outgrowth of the trial's revelations, a symbol of hope and a promise of change. Back in the courtroom's hallowed halls, Dogg's silent vigil had left an indelible mark. His reactions had not only lent credibility to Snoop Dogg's testimony, but had also sparked a broader discussion about the remarkable intuition found in animals, a reminder that loyalty, instinct, and truth can manifest in ways that transcend the spoken word. Experts in animal behavior later noted that Dogg's responses were not mere coincidences, but were indicative of a deep, almost empathetic connection forged over years of shared adversity. For many, this connection became a metaphor for the unbreakable bond between a community of survivors and their unwavering supporters. In one of the more memorable moments following the verdict, Snoop Dogg returned to the studio, his sanctuary and creative haven. There, surrounded by vintage microphones and familiar studio lights, he began crafting what would soon become the anthem of a new era. As he laid down a soulful beat and penned lyrics that spoke of hope, resilience, and the reclamation of one's voice, Dogg's loyal companion rested faithfully at his side. The studio became a crucible of transformation, where the pain of the past was alchemized into the promise of a brighter future. Every note, every beat, carried the legacy of the struggle and the triumph of justice. Months later, as the Voice of Truth initiative gathered momentum and more artists joined the call for reform, Snoop Dogg and Dogg became the living embodiment of that movement. They were invited to speak at panels, contribute to workshops, and even collaborate on projects that celebrated artistic freedom and ethical practices within the music industry. The story of that fateful trial of a man who had once been silenced and the loyal Dogg who helped him find his voice became a modern legend, inspiring a generation to stand up against injustice. Snoop Dogg's journey was far from over. With every performance, every interview, and every new record he released, he carried with him the memory of that courtroom drama, a reminder that truth, no matter how suppressed, would always find a way to break through. And as Dogg lay by his side during quiet moments in the studio, the silent bond between man and animal continued to speak of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of loyalty. In retrospect, the trial was not just a legal battle, it was a turning point for an entire industry. It forced record companies, producers, and executives to confront uncomfortable truths about exploitation and to rethink the ethics of business practices that had long gone unchallenged. For every artist who had ever felt voiceless, Snoop Dogg's testimony was a clarion call. Your voice matters, your story matters, and together, we can rewrite the narrative of an industry built on dreams, not on deception. As the story spread across the nation, it was clear that the legacy of that trial would endure. Not only had it brought a corrupt mogul to justice, but it had also sparked a cultural shift, a movement where the power of music and the integrity of art would forever be intertwined with the pursuit of truth and justice. And in that legacy, Snoop Dogg and his steadfast companion, Dogg, stood as enduring symbols of hope, a testament to the idea that when the oppressed find their voice, the world will listen.